Hello, the topic in which I'm going to present is culture-based funerals, and the question that will be answered in this presentation is, does having stronger cultural ties during the funeral process result in more benefits towards society? Around the world, there are a multitude of different cultures which play unique roles in funerals. According to a World Census report by the U.S. Census Bureau, there are 7.8 billion people in the world across 195 sovereign countries. In each of these countries, various cultures have formed throughout time, but how many cultures are there? According to a study of world diversity patterns by Palomar College in 2006, there is no definite number of cultures present in the world. Although many cultures can be categorized by similarities, each and every one is unique. In Treem, a neighborhood in New Orleans, they take a unique approach to the funeral process. The video entitled Big Daddy's Last Dance, produced by directors Callan Green and John Casebi, encapsulates a lively performance rather than what many would define as a funeral. This funeral does not follow traditional standards present in many modern-day funerals, which include solemn matters, religious readings, and refined dress attire. But this particular funeral offers a moment of catharsis to the patrons of the funeral through music in the forms of singing and jazz, which are popular in New Orleans culture. This funeral shows that cultural practices of funerals can benefit society. Because different cultural practices of funerals benefit society, having more robust ties to culture during a funeral process results in more happiness. It is easy to see that funerals have a religious element to them. This is an important feature present in many funerals, as it has an immense impact on society as a whole. As Robert Kastenbaum, Professor Emeritus of the Arizona State University, who authored many books about psychological effects related to death, states, the spiritual health of a society can be evaluated by the vigor in which it continues to perform its obligations to the dead. This means that as many more people devote attention to paying respects to the dead, they benefit spiritually. Therefore, funerals which focus on allocating respect to the dead should be encouraged, as they provide mourners with spiritual benefits that outweigh the burden of grief. An example of a vigorous funeral process is found in Botswana. Botswana's funeral process follows a religion-centered procedure that focuses on ecumenism. This idea present in Botswana fosters religious unity, which in turn helps grieving people feel emotional relief for the passing of a loved one by finding condolences within religion. In terms of emotional benefits, funerals are known to have the purpose of helping people move on from the death of a loved one. However, for what reason do funerals help bereaved people overcome their grief? This question is answered by looking into the idea of utilitarianism. British philosopher John Stuart Mill wrote, "The utilitarian standard enjoins and requires the cultivation of love of virtue up to the greatest strength possible, as being above all things important to general happiness." Funerals are a virtuous deed in themselves. Many cultures believe it is important to pay rigorous attention to the quality of funerals because of this virtuous quality. This is why Richard Werbiner, an American anthropologist from the University of Manchester, who specializes in the region of Africa that includes Zimbabwe and Botswana, states, funerals, they show, are the occasions par excellence at which try to give rise to a public space ideally for harmony and mutual support. That is, for the sake of well-being, to manage bereavement. As for social benefits of funerals, it is common knowledge that funerals gather people together to remember those who have passed. One example of this is seen when looking back at the funeral process that takes place in Treem, New Orleans. Green and Casebi, when disclosing the process of the New Orleans jazz funeral, state, the processions generally open with a brass band performing solemn marches and dirges as family and friends accompany the deceased to a burial. This means that not only are family and friends brought together for the procession, but musicians and other members of the community that the music attracts as well. Another extravagant example of people being brought together to mourn was after George V's death. Ina Maria Zwinger, a British-American academic historian who specializes in 20th century Britain, stated, "Royal death thus affirmed a shared sense of Britishness, which strengthened the monarchy and enhanced social and national cohesion." These examples show how some cultures foster social cohesion by inviting people into the mourning process. It is commonly known that funerals tend to be expensive for the families of the deceased, but it's important to consider that the cost benefits the economy as a whole. A specific example of economic benefit was in Ghana during a grand funeral held for a well-known person in Ghanaian society named Akua. As a result of this, the businesses of the area which the funeral was held received a large surge of patrons. Valentina Mazzucato, professor of globalization and development at Massachusetts University, after this grand funeral stated, an analysis of sectors in Ghana showed that Kumasi and Accra, it was the cultural sector, transport providers, funeral services, coffin artisans, cloth retailers, constructors/painters, and food and drink retailers who benefited. But in some cases, cultures can benefit those who are grieving as well. Richard Werbiner, after mentioning the price associated with a funeral in Botswana, stated, although this conspicuous elaboration could be a heavy burden on the immediately bereaved and their relatives, it is important to an important extent, the expenses are met by burial societies, by insurance companies, by donations given and announced at the funeral. By looking how culture has played a role in funerals, it shows how society as a whole benefits. In conclusion, it is seen that globally, different culture-based funerals provide varying benefits to the society they are part of in the aspects of spiritually, emotionally, socially, and financially. Spiritually, funerals put with an emphasis on culture will foster religious participation and unity among the community, while emotionally, these funerals allow people to go through the grieving process to overcome bereavement through a virtuous deed. Socially, these funerals bring grieving people together to remember those who have passed, but will also foster social cohesion. And finally, financially, cultural funerals tend to provide economic benefits to businesses mostly, but culture can also play a role in saving money for grieving families. Although a conclusion was made in this presentation, there have been some implications and limitations. Throughout the research conducted, it was inferred that the addition of culture to the funeral process has the intent of providing a positive impact rather than a negative. The limitations that must be considered are that the benefits that come from culture-based funerals depend on how much effort is put into the funeral process itself. Another limitation that must be considered is no one culture can be considered superior due to the benefits present from funerals alone, as there may be many underlying issues present in a society which can outweigh benefits. And most importantly, that in the modern day, there is a rising opposition to having funerals because it is argued they cause far more problems than they should. This is proven by Mercedes Klug, Director of Aging and Longevity Studies program at the University of Iowa, when she expresses these arrangements also have the potential to bring stress, financial problems, and social pressure. Thank you for listening to my presentation.